Who is a Puerto Rican? Welcome to this video. Send this video to all the people you know who claim to be Puerto Rican. The meaning of a Puerto Rican can vary, but it should not be. To question what is a Puerto Rican, then you should also need to question all other countries and nationalities. Check yourself before you know yourself. That out of the way, this should be among the most objective videos about the topic in the entirety of the internet. So if you think just moving into the island of Puerto Rico makes you a Puerto Rican, then check again, and video may be perfect or not for said viewer. Puerto Rico is still governed by blood, lineages, and ancient inheritance to land. Are Puerto Ricans slowly turning into not actually Puerto Ricans? What are the criteria of being a Puerto Rican? May there be levels to being Puerto Rican? What are Puerto Ricans, anyways? A Puerto Rican to Puerto Rico is equivalent to an Argentinian to Argentina, a Brazilian to Brazil, and a Spaniard to his or her country of Spain. A Puerto Rican is the person of Puerto Rico with Puerto Rican origin. It's an ethnicity. Puerto Rico is our country and nation. It's also called Boricuan, a nationality. However, Puerto Ricans as a country and nation were in fact first in all of Latin or Hispanic America and also North and Central America. Upon Europeans' oldest settlements is in Santo Domingo. Second one is in Puerto Rico. And it's also still a nation with strong ties to Native American ancestry that ties Puerto Ricans to the island, like Mexica will be to an Aztec, making what is modern Mexicans as rightful owners of their own land. What makes Puerto Rico different from Argentina or Cuba is the aspect of the captivity. For instance, Cuba fought and was successful at obtaining freedom, whereas Puerto Ricans had done the exact same thing and failed, only to be met with abusive, oppressive, imperial power without ever being free from this supreme grasp. Puerto Rico meets with the criteria at even greater levels than most countries actually do, even more so than Cuba, just to give an example of factual statement that can easily be explained. Of the criteria we share a same unique, enriched, yet ancient culture. We have our own official languages and noticeable original influences. We still speak ancient pre-Renaissance old type of Spanish that existed around Andalusia and other Spanish provinces. And we also still harbor our Native American tongue, spanning possibly mitochondrias. This includes phenotypes. This rules out the misconception of people thinking Puerto Ricans as United States European American citizens. This claim is extremely misleading as all this video suggests. We Puerto Rican have nothing to do with the USA other than obvious forced paperwork. We never gave in to them. We were aggressively subdued, when in fact we are more original to Puerto Rico than an Argentinian is respectively to Argentina, and what they erroneously call an American to what is, say, the country of United States. A demonym that should have never really happened. This is what an original Puerto Rican is. An original Puerto Rican is the genetic, cultural, and spiritual union of Spaniards and Taino had within the island of Puerto Rico that is also called Boricuan. Most likely starting from 1510 to 1530, your first literal Puerto Ricans were being born and created. These were literally approximately 65% Native American and 35% Southern European. These multiplies more than the European-only communities and became the Boricua and peoples of San Juan Bautista, because Christopher Columbus himself had named the island of Boricuan San Juan Bautista in 1493. Unless you were from some Spanish villa, like the second oldest modern city or settlement of Americas, in San Juan called Villa Caparra, Puerto Rico, Boricuan. Then if so, these would have been small European communities with some European wives and some Taino concubines. For example, Rio Piedras may have been home to mestizo Puerto Rican communities up to the early to mid 1900s, while Santurce would have been your more mulatto Puerto Rican communities but just next to each other. This is not necessarily the rule. However, this is backed by historical facts that confirms name Rio Piedras was in fact a place of rivers and rocks where these early Spaniards took to vacation and mate with the Taino concubines. As maybe a decade or two began to pass, Spanish are finding themselves short in manual Taino labor. In other words, the already enslaved Taino began to die due to an array of mortal factors, such as overworked, European disease, and the worst abuse and genocide human history has ever sustained. Skip a few decades from this era. Now, Puerto Ricans have a few new entries to the genetic pool. One of these would mark a broader meaning to what is a Puerto Rican and would eventually equal the Taino and European voices among Borican. By 1530, 69% of the slave class were African. However, these were not the only demographic that was added onto the Puerto Rican slaves at the time, as Central American natives were coming in as slaves. Natives from the Andes, Guarani Caribas captured by the Spanish, natives from Venezuela, Guyanas, Colombia, and even other fellow Taino of Quisqueya and Cuba were coming into Puerto Rico as well. Compared to Africans, a 50 to 7 may be a close estimate. Actually, some historians may add that some of the slaves may have been Guanche natives as well. A good estimate for a Puerto Rican from 1530 to 1550 is full Taino, full Spanish, full African, mestizo, at a rate of higher than 65% Taino or native blood, higher than the European ancestry. Some mulattos, maybe a few trigueños, and there is a concrete possibility there was thousands of possible Sambo children being born at this time as well. These are half African, half Native American Caribbean, who may have been brushed off and classified as African slave, as by the 1800s the number of African slaves is almost nearing the 20,000 number. However, it's most likely many intermarried with Native Americans as well, to increase human resources. This notion is supported by modern genomics. From Puerto Rican historical facts, we can see a boom in African ancestry in the 1700s, where around 300 interracial marriages between the Criollo families or Spanish descendants or haciendas and territories and the African or already by then possibly Trigueño slaves, suggesting many slaves were part Arawak as well. They were also part Taino. It is noteworthy to add Taino communities still existed in Puerto Rico at this time. People speak and suggest about the surviving mountain Taino, who were the real Jibaro before immigrations. People survived around the island, which explains in part how every municipality retained cultural values, such as Taino vocabulary. There must have been at least maybe 3,000 Taino left, and alive, thriving and surviving, whom we all descend from. The Spanish voyages brought conversos, most likely many Sephardic Jews at first Spanish fleets, immigrations, whom also harbored Guanche natives as slaves, as people contend. The first Boricua emerged, and who were providing the females for this rapid spread of Puerto Ricans was the 78 Taino families, and the Jibaro, mountain-based Taino. Before 1800s, Puerto Ricans resembled today's mestizo and Native American people, other Spanish or European-like, with a minority of Africans and already mixed mulattoes and trigueñoism, but may have all been excluded from census. This includes the mestizo natives and mountain Jibaro, or they were all lumped together in the same groups at times, turning what's indigenous voiceless and invisible. By 1777, the population of the island was above 70,000. Let's move on to the next genetic event. We shall not expand into the reasons. However, we will speak about La Real Cédula de Gracias. The Spanish crown had conditions for peoples and other hidden yet known agenda. Some may add the whitening of the Caribbean. In brief, this royal decree enabled the entry of hundreds of thousands of Europeans to flush the island in migration, in a wave that may have lasted up until the late 20th century, and almost irreversible damage onto the original gene pool of what used to be a Puerto Rican prior to 1815. Upon 1815, it is recorded around 100,000 Canarians immigrating into the island of Puerto Rico. 100 Spanish families such as peoples from Asturias, Andalusia, Catalunya, Extremadura, Islas Baleares, and Basques. We may have recently, as of the more modern era, been receiving other immigrants such as Arabs and Galicians. Hundreds of French and Corsican families. This includes Italians, Sardinians, Sicilians, Irish and Scottish immigrants. Other Nordic and Slavic admixture entries may be seen in modern era as well. However, it is possible Portuguese DNA impacts the island of Puerto Rico at a similar level as the Spanish influence, as Portuguese also immigrated, but people would add how Canarians may as well have high levels of Portuguese DNA. When this time arose, already by the end of the 19th century, the Puerto Rican population reached the million mark. Jibaro Taino are also met with Guanche, and Europeans who went to live uphill. And food in scarcity forces mountain-bound Taino to the cities and urbanized areas in search of easier supplementation. Irish men enter mulattism and they merge with Afro-Boricua communities, like the Scarrett family. We start to see African Boricua with green or blue eyes. We see even freckles and lighter tones of frizzy hair among the population. However, originating from the mixture of African Boricua with Irish or Celtic peoples. Female trigueña is favored as of modern genomics and mitochondrial lineages. Women that were descendant of the original 78 families, the 78 Taino families, were favored throughout a time frame of 5 centuries. Italians, Corsicans, and French created their own businesses, and they themselves are also in modern era equivalent to a sort of Jibaro man or Criollo man. Although similar, do not mean the same. We may see and presume the same behavior pattern from most of the European sides. By 1850, only a few Taino villages were left untouched. One is Barrio Las Indieras, just south of what my family at Sabana Grande, who had pure Taino, went from 100% Taino to most being at a rate of 65% Taino approximately. And this would be from Cabo Rojo all the way to Ponce, who are among the highest Puerto Ricans of Taino descent. Most pure Taino were impacted around 35% by La Real Cédula de Gracias. The history of Sabana Grande, where my Taino grandmother comes from, Concepcion Pérez Bonilla, 1875, says, the Spanish and Taino of Sabana Grande begin to intermarry. Other Spanish authorities become alert of the fact, so they send fleets to complain to the Spanish crown about the Taino-Spanish intermarriages of Sabana Grande. In the end, even if this was totally prohibited and as much as for the conservatives became a problem, this still happened as a Puerto Rican historical fact. These Europeans may have been, as of my great-great-grandmother, names suggest, Pérez and Bonilla, also Vázquez and Almodóvar, suggesting conversos, Sephardic Jews, and Basques, respective to Taino who lived along their farmlands and riverbanks. For an easier perspective, Puerto Ricans at this time, such as 1850, using only 4 locations. The East has high trigueñoism, where every town has a balance of African, European, and Native American influence depending in what region. The West had a northern influence of Canarians and Corsicans and French. More Taino, the more we would move towards Utuado, and a southern influence of mestizos that look more to the European side. 15% approximately less Taino north, however, and 15 to 20% more Taino the more southwest, like previously mentioned. The south has a mixture of immigrants like the north, but like every town, it expresses its fair share of the influence of the 78 original Taino families of Puerto Rico. Some towns south still have some ancient African ancestry, seen by their possible curly hair for some families. The north has its Taino family influence, but in Puerto Rico it's the most impacted area by Canarians. What used to be 1500s African ancestry today harbors around 10 to 20% Taino ancestry, and up to 40% of that depending on which area, let's say the center, such as Caguas. Even if we mention only four, the central part is rich in original genetics, which was preserved by the mountains. What used to be a Spaniard is now high levels of mestizo or castizo, which is 25%. Then, newer immigrations cut off the message Puerto Ricans had in the 1800s from pure Taino and 65% Taino to now in the modern era at a level of 35, 30, 27, 25, 20, 15, 11, and 7% Taino. This information is pertinent to many questions such as who's Puerto Rican? Are the people who entered La Cédula de Gracias Puerto Rican? I guess now they are. But if we account La Cédula de Gracias onto serious objectiveness, real Puerto Ricans are around 30 to 40% less Puerto Rican than they used to be before 1815 and at a national level, considering there are still almost pure Taino people still around. Now these should be around 60, 50, and around 40% Taino. There is sufficient genetic data to presume these conclusions, which are objective. We have the evidence and the work put in to serve this scientific and known claim, even to the skeptics. I conclude immigrations with 10,000s of Ashkenazi Jews entering the island in 1930. This, of course, also impacted the island. Much of these are also set to join the mountain and Jibaro communities. Who's the Puerto Rican group or person with more right of being a Puerto Rican or a Boricua of Borican? Puerto Ricans with the greatest right of being a Puerto Rican is a pure Puerto Rican Taino. Are modern Puerto Ricans Puerto Rican? Yes. Speaking after La Cédula de Gracias, 1815, the circumstances say Puerto Ricans are 100% Puerto Rican, but around 30 to 40% of their added European admixture was a total forced event. And although not original, from this event Puerto Ricans idealistically can still be called 100% Puerto Ricans. One of the many arguments is many of these Europeans encountered Taino communities upon 1815, which would mean many unions and marriages at this time were the result of love and not only colonization. Please understand the logic behind the statement, but that even in an event of colonization and intermarriage, the Taino genes and the lineage are still being passed down. We are seeing a correlation between the blood of the Puerto Rican Taino Native Americans and the inheritance and patrimony of the island itself. If somebody decides to move to Puerto Rico, do they suddenly become Puerto Rican? No. Puerto Rican is something you're born with and you cannot acquire. If a Dominican person has babies with a Puerto Rican, are they Puerto Rican? Only half Puerto Rican, and the Taino blood may be compromised. If a Puerto Rican decides to move to the USA, are they now United States Americans? No. We are peoples from the Caribbean in Puerto Rico, and United States is a melting pot of cultures per se, while we have our own, even though ours is also influenced. If a Puerto Rican goes to Japan or is born in Japan, are they considered Japanese? Absolutely not. Even if they were half Japanese is not enough to be accepted as a Japanese in Japan's culture. So why would it be different for us in Puerto Rico? So learn to protect and treasure our own native ancestry. It's our own ethnicity and blood. The place we come from still standing. You don't call a Chino or a Chinese in Puerto Rico a Boricua. So this tears down that type of hypocrisy. If a Puerto Rican moves to the United States and has babies with another Puerto Rican, is the baby now in the USA not Puerto Rican? No, the baby is still Puerto Rican. As long as the line is always pure Puerto Ricans, it doesn't matter where you live, you cannot change your ethnicity. By the third generation, the mind might be so far outside of what's a Puerto Rican that It may or may not matter. But the Taino DNA is either being spoiled away and diluted. Most of these don't really care about Puerto Rico, down to the second to the third generations, and are lost causes, unless they themselves eventually do something about it. Being Puerto Rican is based on a circumstance, on love, and recurrent resistance and colonial history that we can trace with our veins. If you don't have these, you cannot be Puerto Rican. Puerto Rican is not something anybody can wear other than true Puerto Ricans. For this conclusion, the catalyst for Puerto Rican DNA would be at least 1% Puerto Rican Taino of Borican DNA. So I solidified this claim by the fact Puerto Rican Taino blood owns the island, and nobody can take that from a Taino Puerto Rican, which is at least 1%. Unless the counterpart attempts to take it by force, I say 1% blood rule. But knowing Puerto Ricans are approximately 5% to 45% Puerto Rican Taino Native American on average, it is the recurrent washing that threatens these numbers that are so delicate. It should be stopped, and measures should be taken to harbor and reserve our Taino lineage and inheritance. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Leave any additions you would like to add to this video essay in the comment section, as it will be welcomed. This is Abaqueto Neborique, and I'll see you on the next video.